This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 10, Episode 6. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network, brought to you by HK. Today is Friday, June 14th, 2024, as of the recording of this episode, which means it's Flag Day. Happy Flag Day.
Oh, I didn't know it was Flag Day.
Yeah, June 14th. I always remember because it's a week before my birthday.
Oh.
Yep. So happy Flag Day. Hopefully you put up your American flags and are honoring this special day. I think it's a good one to remember. Today's episode, as I mentioned, the title sponsor is HK, but it's also sponsored by the Guardian Conference, the 2024 Guardian Conference, as well as by Gunfighter Gun Oil. But first, I'm your host, Riley Bowman, and this is Doc McLaughlin. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Always happy to be here.
Absolutely. We've got a fun episode ahead for you. We're going to talk about how to deal with gear snobs like me, like Riley.
Are you a gear snob, Riley?
I don't think I am.
No.
Jacob apparently thinks I am, because this was Jacob's title idea. He was the one that came up with the title, even though he's not with us recording this right now.
Well, I would have to say that of the two of you, you are definitely the more snobby of the gear preferences.
That's fair. That's fair.
Jacob doesn't have any preferences, so he's as unsnobby as it gets, I would say.
I'd like to think I am not snobby, but I don't know. We'll see.
Well,
we're going to talk about some specific examples, and I'll share. I mean, like, there's definitely some things that I like some high end here.
Prefer?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What does that mean? What are we talking about today? I think we're talking about what are some options? What are some high-end bougie type of options that might be some of your recommendations as you progress through your training evolution in your training, that eventually you will want higher end, better type of gear. But until you get to that point, what's some lower end gear that'll help you out? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think the idea, the purpose behind this episode today is to discuss quality options that don't have to cost an arm and a leg. Like, what are some tips on, like, we want to use quality gear, because if we're talking about life-saving gear, I mean, this is important as a medical professional, dare I say, as our resident, medical expert with Mountain Man Medical, you don't want to use a low-quality tourniquet or a low-quality chest seal or low-quality anything, because it's life-saving gear, right? So I think the same applies for concealed carry gear, which a medical could be a part of that. But we're talking guns, holsters, optics, lights, whatever, right? So we're going to get into that. I think it's a valuable topic for today's discussion. Hope that you guys enjoy it. Please feel free to share this with your friends and family and coworkers or gun shooting buddies, whatever. It's always appreciated when you share the podcast with others, like-minded individuals. Today's episode, as mentioned, is sponsored by the 2024 Guardian Conference. This is where we got 3 days of fantastic training with world-class instructors and amazing people that you can associate with for 3 days in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, September 20th to the 22nd, later this year. So you still got plenty of time to prepare. Tickets still available. I don't know for how much longer. We're selling more tickets this year than we have in years past. So it definitely is possible we could sell out. Go to guardianconference.com. Learn more, get signed up today. I would not delay on this. We look forward to seeing you in September in Oklahoma. We're going to have a great time. The last 3 years have been awesome. Absolutely a fantastic time. Everyone enjoys it and gets a lot out of it. And that's the big thing, is coming away from a fun training event, but having learned a lot of really valuable life-saving skills. Brian, of course, will be there teaching medical. I'll be teaching some shooting stuff. And we got a bunch of other great instructors teaching a variety of topics, ranging from legal to medical, as I mentioned, but also how to deal with unknown contacts, how to properly use OC spray or pepper spray.
Shotgun class, right?
It's going to be a shotgun class. We're planning an AR carbine class for the first time. So not just pistol shooting all weekend. We're going to have a lot of great fun and variety at the 2024 Guardian Conference. Again, guardianconference.com. Actually, one of the sponsors of the Guardian Conference, and also a sponsor of today's episode of the podcast, is Gunfighter Gun Oil. We have a couple of little bottles here sitting with us here today. This is my lubricant of choice for my firearms. Gunfighter Gun Oil I've used now for, 3 or 4 years at least. He says here, the world's best lube. I'm not going to disagree with that. I'll I'll tell you, it works wonders. I was actually teaching in New Mexico last weekend for 3 days, kind of a special class I did jointly with Tim Herron and AJ Zito. First time we ever did it. And it was windy and it was hot and it was very dusty. And I did have one malfunction with my gun on day 2, I think it was. I was shooting an HK VP9L, and they don't malfunction hardly ever. But I knew as I was, like as that day went on, I was like, man, things are really, really dusty. Like the wind just kept blowing. It's like I had dust in my face and my mouth, my eye pro, my ear pro, everywhere, in my optic window, in the gun itself. And the malfunction, when it occurred, I'm like, I'm 99% certain I just need to do a little bit of gun maintenance right now. And I went right over to our safe table, pulled out some gunfighter gun oil. I didn't even bother cleaning. I just added some lubricant, and no problems the rest of the weekend. That stuff works. Check out gunfightergunoil.com today. We appreciate their sponsorship of the podcast. This is the Gunfighter Gun Oil Super Cleaner. This is what I also use for cleaning my firearms. And so there you go. You can pick up any of their products, again, at their website, gunfightergunoil.com.
You run your competition gun pretty wet?
I just make sure things are well lubricated. I don't describe it as like, wet per se, but definitely well lubricated. So
do you run a bead before you start, or is that like, how do you?
Before a major match, I make sure I do some maintenance, and I'll lubricate. And I'll just put a light, kind of a bead, if you will, in each of the pistol rails. I'll hit any of the kind of contact wear points, anywhere I see, wear and tear. So like, on the barrel itself, the barrel hood, just other various points. If it's clear that there's metal rubbing on metal, and maybe wearing a little bit of finish or whatever, yeah, I think it's gonna get some lubricant for sure.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. Check it out, guys. Thanks for your support of our sponsors that makes this podcast possible. Let's get into our topic, Brian. So, how to deal with gear snobs like Riley, like me. Let's focus actually first on, let's just tackle the topic of guns. Last week's episode we talked, or maybe it's 2 weeks ago now. Yes, two episodes ago, where we talked about your first gun and why I now carry an HK. Now, quite a few people consider HK pistols to sort of be a snob's gun, a little higher end.
It's kind of bougie.
Yeah. That's fair. I mean, they are a little bit more spendy than some other options out there for sure. I still think they're definitely reasonable for what they are, because there's definitely way more expensive stuff out there for sure. But it's just interesting because we just did that episode. Obviously, what I'm carrying nowadays are HKs. Really liking them. The VP9 SK, which is what I have on me right now for carry purposes. VP9L and the VP9 Match is what I primarily use for competition use. They're great guns. Are they a bit higher end? Absolutely. Do you have to have a high-end gun to carry for personal defense? No, you don't. So I think that's a good place to start. I didn't always carry or use an HK. I've carried a lot of different things over the years. More recently, some 6-hour pistols, which, I don't know. I mean, I suppose you could even say those are a bit on the higher end of things, price-wise at times. In other words, like, where is a really basic place a person could start?
I know Kel-Tec has a bunch of different options. I know a lot of people like those, and those tend to be a little on the cheaper end, like one stage above a high point, but definitely a stage or two below, like Glock or M&P, I would say. So on the very, very low end, it seems like Kel-Tec's got a couple of good options. And then midpoint would be like Glock, M&P, and then higher end would be like HK, 6-hour, and then you start getting into probably more of your, I don't know, like the bougier type of, I don't know, Springfield maybe? I don't know, what do you think?
Oh, I don't know that I'd call that bougie per se.
No, not Springfield, but what is that?
Like a staccato?
Staccato, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's what's funny, because even like staccato is more of a mid-range, or even entry level. Yeah, I guess since you have like things like the Springfield Prodigy and whatnot now, maybe that's your low end 2011. Staccato used to be what I would consider to be like entry level if you were looking at a 2011. But in the bigger picture of things, like you're talking, $2,000 gun, a $2,500 gun, compared to, $500 Glock. So yeah, staccato would be bougie in that sense, but just understand that you can spend $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 real quick on truly like nice high-end 2011 style pistols, right? And so when you're talking $2,000 or $2,200 for a staccato, that's a big difference between some of those really high-end things, but definitely still a step up from your typical Glocks and whatnot, right? So to your point about Kel-Tecs, and I hope no one takes offense at anything we say here today. I have friends that work at Kel-Tec. That they don't necessarily always have the greatest reputation for reliability. I'm talking historically here. I'm not talking necessarily so much more recently. There's mixed reports depending on who I talk to in the industry as far as what they're seeing reliability wise from Kel-Tec pistols. And so anytime I've seen like mixed reports, that to me is almost already a little bit of it's like, well, why would I want to bother with something, when it's like, okay, maybe I roll the dice and I get a good one this time, but I roll the dice again and I get, something that's not as reliable. We all have the responsibility, I think, to test fire, run the guns we carry through a battery test through a number of rounds. We talked about that a little bit, that one episode. We talked about choosing your first gun. It's a good idea to run at least 500 rounds through it, at least maybe 1,000 rounds, and that's also including probably 100 rounds or maybe even more if you can afford it. 200 rounds would be fantastic if your chosen self-defense load, and then knowing that you can make it through say 1,000 rounds where 200 of those is your self-defense load and the gun's still running reliably. Like, okay, cool. Now I could have some confidence, like regardless of the brand, regardless of the model, if that particular gun can make it through that battery test, then I could have reasonable confidence that it's a good gun. It's going to run. It's going to work when I need it to work. Because reliability is ultra important when it comes to the gun that I'm carrying. I like to keep it simple when people come to me for advice, and I personally feel like, honestly, one of the best values on the market. I mean, typically you probably say like a Glock or something, but actually Smith & Wesson M&P line of pistols, whether it's M&P Shield or just the standard M&P full-size guns, they're usually priced very, very competitively. We're talking like you can pick up a Shield or even an M&P 2.0 full-size for in the sub $500 range for sure. And that's pretty compelling because they have a history of reliability. They have a proven track record, and they're very affordably priced, I think. So that's probably, honestly, my recommendation would be like, that's where I would start people is take a look at M&Ps. And also Glocks. I think they're maybe a little more spendy in today's market, but not terribly so. And again, two great brands that have proven track records that are reasonably priced.
Well, and another benefit is that both the Glock and the M&P are pretty popular, so they've got a lot of aftermarket products that
Right.
you can find. So, like, even if you start off with something very simple and not very high end, I mean, you can swap out a majority of the pieces in that gradually as your budget allows. You just buy a piece here or there, ask for one for Father's Day or on your birthday, and occasionally, you can get a pretty high end M&P or Glock with all the bells and whistles, as you just build it as you go.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, in your spot on as far as like M&Ps, Glocks, the SIGs, those kind of big three brands are pretty well supported in the aftermarket. So just about anything I want to swap out, I can probably swap out. So I can customize it to my particular needs. I can change out sights relatively easily, grips or grip panels or whatever. If I want to add a mag well, those kinds of things, those are easy to do. If I want to do something trigger related, all kinds of aftermarket solutions for triggers with those big three brands. So that is definitely an important consideration when talking about the gun that you are choosing. Now, again, we covered that 2 episodes ago, season 10, episode 4, your first gun and why I now carry an HK. And so you can go listen to that episode and hear our pointers on, gun selection and what to look for with that. But for purposes of today's conversation, yeah, okay, so I carry an HK currently. It's a little bit more expensive of a gun. Is that what's required? No. I mean, there's a reason, obviously, why I carry it, and I trust it. And it's a very reliable gun. It's a fantastic gun. It's a very accurate gun. It's a gun that works. It's a gun that I believe I can fully, throw my trust in, behind. So like, but those are the same factors that are important with regards of any gun that I choose, right? And so that's really the point today is, are there lower cost solutions that also meet those criteria? Absolutely. And so feel free to explore those, but be careful about things outside of some of those well-known, proven brands, because I think people do, like, it's tempting when you see a gun for sub $300, advertised in your local Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, mailer that they send you. It's like, oh, sweet, I can go pick up that Keltec or whatever, just name your brand for $250. Fantastic. Okay, but is it going to work? And are you going to have the ability to actually shoot it enough to know that you can do your own reliability test? Those are important considerations because we are talking about life-saving gear. So today's episode is intended to talk about, like, can we get into quality gear that doesn't cost an arm and a leg? Yes, with respect to guns. Where is that number at? I don't know. As far as like the dollar amount. Obviously, we all have our own respective budgets we have to work with. Somebody spending $300 on a gun is going to be a lot of money for them. What can you get for $300 that's reliable? It's a little bit more tricky of a thing. And then if that's you and that's all you can afford as far as a gun, it's going to be hard for you to afford buying the necessary ammo to actually do a complete and thorough test of that gun. So might make more sense for you buying, say, a Glock, and you spend a little bit more initially on the gun itself, but maybe you can feel a little bit more confident in not having to spend as much in ammo to actually thoroughly test it because they kind of already have a track record.
Yeah, and don't forget that on the other side of this too, like, just spending a ton of money on a gun isn't going to make you a great gunfighter. You got to go out and get that training. Make sure you're not relying on that gear. It'll take you a little bit to learn how to run a race gun, effectively. So starting off with something simple and easy to use, get that training, get yourself trained up. And that'll be a good way of kind of getting started.
Yep.
Spend that money. Don't spend all that money on that really expensive gun. Spend it on a cheaper gun that's still useful, something you can use it for, but then you can use the rest of that money that you would have spent on good training.
Yeah. I will tell you, so related to guns, let's talk magazines for just a moment. We don't have to spend a ton of time here, but where it comes to the magazines that you put in the gun, I have rarely found that it's worth spending less. What I mean by that is, like, there are some off-brand, magazines. Give one example I've never had good success with, and that's Pro Mag, and it's very popular. You'll see it in a lot of your small, you'll see it in your local stores. You'll see it in your Bass Pro and Cabela's stores. You'll see it at your local home and ranch store or whatever. The Pro Mag brand is out there and it's well known, and they're very tempting because they're very affordably priced. However, I have rarely had one actually work reliably, consistently, especially over a period of time. And so I'm a big believer. I will say I'm a snob when it comes to mags. I generally only buy factory, mags, meaning, like, if it's a Glock, I buy Glock mags. If it's SIG, I buy SIG mags. If it's a HK, I buy HK mags. And yeah, they can be spendy. I mean, a single magazine might be $50, $55, and you see the Pro Mag one on the local store shelves, and you're like, oh, that was $22. It's like more than half off. That's very tempting. But again, is it worth it? I mean, I guess if it's just for plinking purposes, it maybe doesn't matter. But if it's something you're depending upon your life with or whatever, don't go cheap on mags, in my opinion. That's one thing I will proudly be a snob about, is magazines.
Yeah, feeding your gun is important. How do you feel about Magpul or PMags?
So I've had good success with those. That's probably one of the few exceptions I would say I'm okay with. I have heard some mixed reports from a few folks that they've had some issues with the Magpul mags for, like, Glocks and stuff. That hasn't been my case. That hasn't been my experience. So the ones I've got, and I've got a number of them, they've worked pretty well. I have primarily used those as training mags, meaning I only use them when I'm training on the range, not for a carry use. Sorry, I'm a little yawn here. So that's probably one of the few exceptions. But again, even then, I relegate them for training use only.
I've been using Magpul Glock mags pretty exclusively the past couple of years. I have a couple of Glock mags, but they're so mixed in, and I don't recall ever having an issue that I've noticed that's come from the magazine itself. So I've never had a problem with it.
And obviously, they're well known for their rifle, their AR pattern mags, and that's actually all I basically use are Magpul AR mags. And again, I've had no problems with the pistol mags. The thing there is, I mentioned using them as training mags. That's a good practice to do regardless of the magazine you use. You should have magazines, I believe, set aside as being training mags. So mags, those are the ones that get used the most. And then your actual carry mags or duty mags, if you're a cop or whatever, are ones that hardly ever get used. They get used every once in a while more as a function check, like does it still work? Does it function like it's supposed to? But I try to keep my carry mags in really excellent shape, almost brand new. Just so that I know they're not like getting beat up, they're not getting dropped to the deck, they're not getting feed lips bent, they're not getting dirt and grime and little grit and stuff inside of them, that kind of thing.
So that's a good point. How often do you do magazine maintenance?
As often as I feel I need to. If followers start getting sticky, that kind of thing.
Because especially if you're carrying concealed, like it'll trap a ton of lint and that kind of stuff eventually. Yeah.
I haven't really seen much in the way of lint getting in my mags. I mean, granted, I don't carry a spare mag. That might be a different thing.
Yeah.
But the gun that's in the mag generally is, or the mag that's in the gun is generally not an issue from what I've seen. But, probably not a bad idea to tear them apart, once every 6 months, once every year, whatever you think is appropriate. Do some maintenance on them. By that, I use just a dry brush, a magazine brush. You can buy them at any number of places. You can buy them on Amazon. I just take the floor plate off, pull the guts out of the magazine, run the dry brush through the magazine body, put it back together. That's about all I do.
Yeah.
I would not recommend putting lubricant or anything like that inside the magazine itself. It's generally not recommended. So I just dry brush them and make sure they're clean and that everything is smooth and functioning properly. And do that once or twice a year, or when I need to. So like this last weekend, teaching in New Mexico in that very dry, dusty, dirty environment, mags are getting dropped in the dirt. There's a couple times I had to take them apart and clean them just to get through the class.
Yeah, just a quick swab and you're back in it.
Yep. Exactly. Let's talk about lights. I think this is a good one because there's so many options for lights. We're talking handheld lights, weapon lights, that kind of stuff. For instance, I've got here in my pocket, this is one of my favorites. This is a bougie light. This is a Mod Light OKW. This is like a $300 plus light. Now, I obviously have it, and I carry it, and I use it on the daily. I don't know that I actually light it up, but I have it with me, and it's ready for use daily. I've been going for a nightly walk, though, lately, and with out on the street, and this is in my hand. And if there's any question at all about something, I can light things up from my distance with this light because it's a very, 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 very powerful light. It's got a very focused beam, and that's why I have it. Is because of the job that it performs. It is expensive, but is this required? Is it necessary? Not necessarily. I think there's definitely plenty of options out there that are quality options that don't necessarily have to cost $300 for a light. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on lights?
I've got a lot of thoughts on lights. I think lights are one of those things that people tend to overlook when it comes to their gear. And it's a lot more popular these days as people are wearing their EDC stuff. But primarily we're looking at something that's going to be packable. We want to make sure that we've got something that we can carry around without too much difficulty. And the smaller the pen lights get, the less lumens you have. And it depends a lot on what your function is. Are you just looking for dropped keys at night? Or are you trying to blind somebody and maybe you want a DNA collector on the end of it to take a little core sample? Yeah, you take a little core sample out of your attackers for later investigation. You know what I mean? So I think one of those options are always good because if you can use these as a striking tool on top of that, is that something that you want to do? Do you even know how to do that? I think those are all things that, could come in a much more higher end flashlight. And they're definitely not something that you really have to put out ahead of time. if you're just getting started out. I know Surefire has got some pretty expensive lights, but Streamlight also has some. I would consider Streamlight to be more middle of the road.
Yeah.
Not quite as expensive as Surefire,
I agree.
but not cheap. Not a cheap China knockoff either.
Right.
And so I tend to enjoy their products quite a bit. And then the other one that I would say would be a slightly lower end below Streamlight would be Olight. I like a lot of their types of stuff, especially some of their EDC lights that they have are kind of small and nice to use, but not quite so tactical, I would think.
Yeah, I was going to say actually one of the more entry level lights that I think is quality is the Phoenix brand, FENIX. I've got a few of those, and they've done very well over the years for me. The Olights, I'm not as keen on. I mean, they do have some really smart, clever designs. I don't care so much in the case of a lot of their handheld stuff, but I haven't been as impressed with their weapon-mounted lights. There's another thing there too. So understand this, that when you get into lower quality lights, they like to market to people and say, look, this light puts out 1,200 lumens, 1,600 lumens, 2,000 lumens. You even see things advertised for now, which is crazy bright. What you don't realize is that sometimes those numbers, number one, they can be fabricated, because I mean, who's going to test and validate that? There are a few people out there that actually do that, but it's not typically well known. And so, sometimes those numbers are, who knows if they're actually accurate or not.
It's very subjective.
Yeah, and number two, I mean, there is an objective measurement of such things, but yes, I mean, you're going to pick up a 2,000 lumen light and a 1,200 lumen light, and you're going to shine them both and be like, they're both freaking bright. You know what I mean? So that's one thing. But what you may not realize is that those advertised lumens, the light might only put that out for sometimes as little time as 15 seconds, and then they'll throttle down to a much lower lumen output. Some of that's for thermal regulation, because the light will get so hot so fast, and it could actually, number one, hurt you, burn you, or actually damage electronics inside the light, getting hot enough. And so those are things that you gotta watch for. I'll give you an example. This one does throttle down, but it's like after 3 minutes, which is, I mean, that's quite a bit better. And this was putting out or maybe it's 5 minutes. Anyway, I have been in a situation where that's going to be an issue for me. And I know of a few other lights out there too that don't throttle the output at all. And those are always going to be relatively higher end lights. All of the lower end stuff that I've come across will advertise a certain lumen output, but it might be for only 15 seconds, 30 seconds, maybe 1 minute, maybe 90 seconds, not that long. And so that's something to be aware of. Typically, your higher end stuff is going to actually provide the output that's advertised and maintain it for a longer period of time, which is worthwhile. Give you some specific examples for like a good pocket or handheld light. So like the ProTac HL is one that I have that I quite like, and also the ProTac 2L. They put out good output. Like for instance, the ProTac HL. This is a Streamlight, by the way, Streamlight brand ProTac HL, 1,000 lumen light. It's got a pretty decent beam. It's like 12,000 candela. It's not phenomenal, but it's not bad. So what's candela? Candela is, the way to think of it is how focused, like how narrow of a beam of light can that flashlight project over distance. That's a simple layman's term sort of way of explaining that. So I'll give you an example. Like this OKW light, I think is like 60,000 candela or something like that. So what that means is it puts out a really tight beam over, like it holds that tightness for a great distance. That's why I can literally light up the street my house is on from one end to the other end, which is not insignificant. Like it's probably, I haven't actually measured it, but it's probably at least 200 yards, and I can light up that whole street from one end to the other end, and see, like, maybe not see a person's face because 200 yards away they're pretty small, but I can see that there's somebody there. I can see a vehicle. I can identify the color of that vehicle, from a great distance. So that's another reason why I have this really bougie light. It's because you get into some higher end stuff and you can get some really, really good candela numbers, which means that you can get your light really out there. I also live near a school, and I can shine this and light up, the property of the school. I can light up the back of the building of the school. This is why this is in my pocket. However, I also have a second light, which is actually over there charging because I realized it needed to be charged. And that's a Surefire Stiletto. I don't even have the Stiletto Pro. I just have the standard Stiletto. That is more of an administrative light for me. And I quite commonly have both of these lights on me at all times because this is a single output. This thing puts out, like, actually it's less lumens than you would think. I think it's like 600 lumens or 800 lumens or something like that. I think it's 600, but it's very, very tightly focused light because it has a very high candela number. This is really a tactical light for me. This solves tactical problems. This is something I can use to control a person because if I put this in your eyes, you either have to turn away or you have to do something else because you will not be able to continue looking into this and function because that's how bright it is. The Stiletto that I have from Surefire, again, Surefire being a higher tier brand name, that light's like, I don't know, $200 light or something. It's not very cheap either. Maybe it's $160, but that is more of an administrative light. And I like it. It's rechargeable. It actually has a little bit of a wider beam. It's a little bit more useful, like indoors. I'm doing administrative tasks, and it has multiple light outputs. It's got like 5 lumens, 100 lumens, and 600 lumens, or something like that. I like it. I love it. It fits my purpose very well. It's very compact. It's rechargeable. It does what I need to do for an administrative light. I'm not going to cry or shed any tears for somebody that chooses an inexpensive light for administrative purposes. However, when I'm thinking of a light for tactical purposes, I do want quality. It doesn't have to be something like a $300 mod light, but it could be a $70 Streamlight ProTac 2L or whatever. It's going to do a pretty good job, be pretty reliable. Honestly, like I haven't had any of my Streamlights die on me. That includes my weapon mounted ones as well. Speaking of weapon mounted lights, you got Surefire lights. Those are pretty spendy weapon mounted lights. Mod Light makes a weapon mounted light. It's pretty spendy. Streamlight is probably a good place to go if you're looking for a quality but budget oriented option. So you can buy like a TLR1 HL for a little more than $100.
Yeah,
and that's a pretty good deal.
One of the other benefits of that is the Streamlight is much more widely known and more popular, so you're more likely to find a holster that will match that.
Yes.
Whereas if you go with Olight, their weapon-mounted lights are not nearly so popular, and the odds of you finding a holster company that supports that is going to be low.
That is a huge challenge when you start straying from Surefire and Streamlight with respect to lights. Yeah.
As soon as you get away from just those two companies, you're going to have a hard time finding holsters, right?
Yeah, it gets more challenging for sure.
But they still have some companies out there like Enforce. They've got their APLC or.
Well, that's been discontinued a while ago now. They have what I think is the Wild line. Wild 2, I think, is one of the models. Very, very different shape from the old lights, the APLCs that they used to make. And I have seen hardly any holsters to support any of those Enforce lights nowadays. Yep. Those new Wild lights from Enforce seem to have pretty good specifications in terms of performance. So
I haven't seen them yet. I haven't had a chance to play with them.
I haven't even seen one in the wild. I've just seen them online.
Now, I know one of the things that you got to make sure you do if you're looking to carry a light on your gun or on your person and you're doing it for self-defense, you got to make sure you know what you're doing because your light can be detrimental to you if you don't know how to use it correctly. I was doing a force-on-force training with the International School of Tactical Medicine out in Palm Springs, and I was the opposing force for the SWAT team coming in, and they had pistols and submachine guns loaded up with simunitions, and we were inside this abandoned mall, and I had a Sig Sauer pistol that shot the simunitions, and I would go hide in this abandoned mall, and then the SWAT team would come to find me. And so they would tell me, like, hide anywhere you want back in this area, but just wait there, and then we're going to come locate you and come hunt you down. And so I'd be sneaking in there, and it would be dark, and I could tell immediately. They had a bunch of different teams from all over the U.S. I think they had one from L.A., Reno, Las Vegas, and some that were on the East Coast, but they also had a couple of SEALs that were up there from San Diego to come take this course. And I could see that some of these people were much better with their light discipline than other teams. And the teams that knew what they were doing, I knew I was going to have a very difficult time beating them because they were using light correctly. They weren't backlighting themselves. They were using it very methodically and very carefully so that they were at an advantage instead of a disadvantage. And the teams that I could see immediately, they didn't understand light discipline as they were moving in. I knew it was going to be much easier to take out that whole team.
Yeah.
So understanding light discipline is one of those things that most new people and even very experienced people don't understand well. So if you can find yourself a good light discipline class, that'd be fantastic. I know we had one at the Guardian Conference. Was it the last 2 years?
Every year we've done.
Every year we're doing one this year too. Yes.
It's actually two. There's two classes. There's two different instructors doing two class sessions on the same night. First 2 years we did it on Saturday night during the weekend of the event. This last year was on Friday night, which is the first night of the event. It was just kind of dependent on range availability and stuff. We have to do it on an indoor range. So everything else in the conference is done at Oklahoma City Gun Club, but the low light training is done at Wilshire Gun, which is an indoor range, not too far from there.
Yeah. So if you've never had the opportunity to try shooting low light and you don't understand light and how to use it, you carry a flashlight, that would be a fantastic option. Find somebody else that's training you, and it'll take you far.
Yep. One of the number one things I see error-wise is people not even so much backlighting themselves, although that is a common error, but the number one I see is the light where they splash light back on themselves. So like if you're coming around cover and you activate the light too soon, or you activate it and your positioning is off in such a way that your light is hitting the wall or whatever it is that you're using for cover, and now you're splashing light onto you. So now you're a lot more visible than, otherwise if it's just the light coming around that corner and shining on your adversary, they're not going to be able to see you. They won't even be able to make out a silhouette, more than likely. They'll just see a really bright light. And if it's a good light like this one, it's going to be blinding and to the point that they can't see anything. And so it's a real problem when people don't understand how to use light effectively and they end up splashing light back on themselves. And now you're just lighting yourself up for your adversary. That's going to end badly for you, for sure. So those are good thoughts. I appreciate you sharing those. Some other things. We talked about guns and mags and lights. I would touch a little bit on knives, just as an example. Jacob definitely thinks I'm a knife snob. Understand that I still think I'm quite reasonable in a lot of my knife choices because, again, when you realize you can spend many, many, many hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars, on really, really high-end stuff. For instance, what I've got on my today is a simple Benchmade Griptilian. This is like quintessential Benchmade knife right here. Really basic polymer handle, decent steel, but nothing like too crazy. I think this is just 154 cm steel, which is acceptable. It holds an edge well. It sharpens relatively easily. It's good for everyday tasks. This is going to be like a $120 knife, $130 knife, something like that. I realize that some people are like, oh, it's a $130 knife. Okay, yeah, but you know what? This thing is well made. It's lasted a long time. The big thing for me with knives, where I feel like you get what you pay for, is with the steel of the actual blade. And I use my knives daily. And I do not have, number one, I don't have patience for two things. Number one, a dull blade, which is also an unsafe blade. Okay, and if my blades are dull, then they're not useful to me, right? And the second thing is I don't have patience to have to sharpen them all the time. And that's where, blade quality really becomes.
It's got to hold an edge.
Got to hold an edge. It's got to hold it for a while. I got to be able to cut more than a couple of boxes, before I need to sharpen again. And so that's where I think, a knife's a knife. And certainly when it comes to like stabby things, if you're thinking of it from like a defensive context, which this is not necessarily that kind of knife, although it could be. But if that's what you're thinking about, the cheapest knife blade will get the job done as far as stab people. You can go buy a $5 gas station knife and stab somebody with it. It's going to work just fine, So I actually remember having my opinions on this changed a little bit a number of years ago, and I read I think it was a social media post, and it may have been Greg Fritz talking about this very concept, basically saying how like, if you're just looking for something to stab somebody with, you don't have to go choose the highest quality steel, for that purpose, because like that's all it's got to do is stab somebody.
Puncture.
Where it becomes relevant to have like quality steel is if it's a tool that's actually getting used and used regularly, used consistently, and you want it to be able to hold up to that use in terms of not breaking, like breaking tips off, and also not having to like sharpen it all the time. Because ain't nobody got time to sharpen a knife all the time, and so just something to think about. Obviously we have to work within budgets. We're going to talk some more about how we can be more efficient with our budgets. But that's something to consider. I can go buy a $30 knife at Walmart and it'll get the job done and it'll work for a time, but it's not going to last as long. It's not going to hold an edge as long, and I'm going to get a little bit more frustrated with it. And if I just save my dollars up for a few weeks or whatever, I can probably go buy a Benchmade like this that's just north of $100 and probably be a lot happier with it in the long run. So just something to think about.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the difference. What is your area of operation? What's your intended use? If this is a fighting knife, then that's a much different topic, and you need to know how to deploy that in a way that's going to be safe to you. One of the things that generally will happen in a knife fight, if you're using a defensive weapon for that, is that you're going to get cut too. So understanding, your technique and how to use a knife is pretty important. But if you're just going to be using it as your workhorse, to open in boxes and that kind of thing, making sure that you've got a knife with a good edge quality is important. If you cut things, it's much more important for your knife edge for it to be good quality steel if you're cutting things, because you want to be able to maintain your edge and have it be easily resharpened. But for puncturing, that's the most effective way of knife fighting, is to puncture your opponent. You're not generally going to be slashing so much with your knife blade anyway. So, you can, ice picks have been traditionally pretty popular for puncture tools and that sort of thing.
Basic screwdriver will get the job done.
Screwdrivers are one of the most often used puncture tools in crimes. So, be watching out for that.
Yep. Let's talk about, I think this is a relevant, well, I'm going to switch the order actually, because I think this makes more logical sense. Let's talk about how do we maximize or be more, as efficient as we can be with our budget. So tips for that. In other words, I guess the concept here, Brian, is like, okay, so we recognize there are high-end tools, there are lower-end tools, there's mid-range tools. I think we've established the fact that regardless of the tool that is selected, like price can be a factor, probably arguably should be a factor, but it's not actually the most important factor. What's the most important factor is, does the tool fit my purpose? Does it accomplish the job? Does it do so reliably? Does it meet, all these different criteria that I know that I can count on that tool doing what I bought it to do? That's really what's at the core of all of this. And there's plenty of examples where we can buy. I even think, honestly, just where I'm at today, and maybe this is what makes me a snob in Jacob's eyes, but to me, this is a low-end knife. This Benchmade Griptilian, this is a low-end knife, because it's basically just north of $100, where there are $200, $300, $400, $500 knives, readily available out there that are arguably nicer in every respect, but do they do the job as well or better than what this does for me in my personal context today? Not necessarily. So that's a good example of where I need to look at the job the tool is expected to do. How well will that tool do that job? And then what is the cost of that? And weigh that for myself. And so, that's what we have to make, where we have to make some difficult decisions, looking at what my available budget is, what I can spend. And what I can spend is maybe different than what you can spend, or what's different than somebody else can spend. That it'd be nice to have the highest end thing of all the things, but it's not necessary. And this is where, when Jacob accuses me of being a snob, I'm like, oh, maybe, but at the same time, I'm also a pretty I'm a pretty savvy shopper. Like, I don't have all the money in the world. I've got 5 children and a wife to support and feed. A mortgage and cars and all that. We got a lot to spend money on in any given month in our household, and so I still have to be pretty savvy with where I do spend my dollars and what I spend my dollars on. And so this is a topic I think that I'm well versed in.
A lot of people in that boat right now. A lot of people struggling. So we got to stretch that dollar a little bit further than we might need to originally.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think that's where the whole idea of looking at let me give you here's an example. I kind of mentioned one earlier in the episode where it's like, hey, look, you could go buy that $250, $300 low end gun, but then you're going to probably also want to spend about $300 in just ammo alone to run through that gun to have some measure of confidence that gun's going to run reliably. Well, I could instead spend $450 on an M&P 2.0, compact pistol, let's say, that has a pretty proven track record, and it's going to cost me a little bit more money, but I won't have to probably spend as much money on ammo just to prove the dang thing for myself, right? So it's an example of what we're talking about as far as like being as efficient as you can be with your respective budget and with your choices when it comes to buying particular tools. Another example would be, just with the light. Okay, this is a great example because I think there's so many different options available with respect to lights, and there's obviously so many different use cases, but you have tons of options across all different price ranges, and you've really got the opportunity, I think, to weigh your personal use context for what you're looking for in a particular light. If it's just an admin light, again, I think that makes the problem really simple because I could just use my phone light, as an admin light if I really have to. But if it's a defensive light or something that I might use in a tactical manner, that's where I think it gets a little bit tricky. But the nice thing is there's lots of good options, including quality brands, quality names, quality products that don't have, I don't have to go spend Surefire kind of money, Mod Light kind of money, Cloud Defensive kind of money. And so I think the point here, though, this part of the conversation is let's be smart. Let's be wise in our expenditure of our funds. Let's actually look at what our budget is and make wise decisions, because it is tempting at times to just run that credit card bill up, like, I'll just buy the best of everything. And that's cool and all, but there's a price, a cost associated with that, including a longer term one. If I'm paying on that credit card now for a year or two or three, like, well, that's no good, because now this bougie thing I just bought even costs more because I had interest, applied to it at the end of the day because I bought it on a credit card.
Yeah, I know one of my favorite things to do when I'm buying new gear is I was looking up on YouTube. There's just every single piece of gear that you come across, there's somebody who's done a comparison on the top 5 things, including that one kind of a thing, So if you've got questions, YouTube has got answered by subject matter experts, and they can kind of compare and contrast, make sure you get, what works best for your option, your budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just give it some thought, and understand that part of considering your budget means considering everything that goes along with it, because it's really easy to just be like, well, I got $500 to spend, and then just like focus on the gun itself. And so you go buy a $500 gun. And it's like, well, now what do I have left? And I still need to buy a holster. Maybe I need to buy a concealment belt. Maybe I need to buy some ammo, some defensive ammo in particular. So all that stuff starts adding up. And so in other words, when we're planning expenditures with respect to your budget, make sure you're thinking about all the things that go along with that, right? For instance, one of the things, while this is an expensive light, this Mod Light, it also uses a rechargeable battery. So normally, like, you would feed this with, say, a CR123 battery. Well, those are kind of expensive batteries. It cost $1.50, $2 a piece. And if I was using one of those, I'd go through them all the time, and that would have a certain expenditure associated with it. But this uses a rechargeable battery and I have 2 of them, so I can constantly keep one charged. So when this one starts, showing signs that maybe it's getting low, I just swap it out. Put this one on the charger, put the fresh one in, and in that way, and each one of those batteries, I think it was like $18. One came with the light. I spent $18. Bought the spare. The light itself came with the charger. So infinitely, I can feed this light. There's no additional cost associated with it, even though it's an expensive light. This is not unique to this particular Mod Light. You can get Stream lights and Surefire lights and O-lights, and O-lights well known for their rechargeable capabilities.
That's what I like about O-light the most.
Yeah,
it's so quick and easy to recharge their stuff.
Yeah, so that's another consideration, is just making sure we're thinking about all the other costs associated with a particular thing. So we're not just blowing all of our budget on one particular thing and then realizing, oh, wait, but I need these other things too. That's kind of like, folks that'll go buy an AR-15 and they're like, sweet, I spent, X number of dollars on my AR-15 and now I need to put, an optic on it, let's say. And because they spent all their budget on the rifle itself, now it leaves them very little for the optic. So they go put a cheap optic on. Well, that's one thing I would not cheap out on. In fact, I actually meant to talk about optics with you. Maybe we'll come back to that now. That's one thing, especially on a rifle, I would not cheap out on, is on a cheap optic,
Yeah,
especially if it's magnified.
Yeah, it's just something you can't really go super cheap on, because they've got some out there like NC Star, like they've got.
Oh, that's Chinese cheap, brand.
Yeah. You see that a lot on the guns of people who they want the cool factor. They're not trying to. This is their range, their safe queen. They take it out to the range and show their buddies, and they'll have like an NC Star red dot on it,
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's
Exactly.
a quick indication that gun's not intended for real use.
Absolutely. I mean, so some examples there, right? So let's talk about optics. Let's talk about pistol optics first. So, a person could go buy an aim point, they could buy a Trichicon, and the funny thing is I'm accused of being a gear snob, but I actually don't really use much in the way of super high-end pistol optics. Almost everything I use is a Holosun. The most expensive optics I've ever purchased were 6 Hour Romeo 3 Max red dots for my competition guns. Those are spendy optics. They're like $600 optics. But I was looking for a competitive advantage, and they are very, very, very excellent, clear, crisp glass. The dots crisp in them. The optic itself, it's a nice big window. Nice thin bezel. The frame itself, the optic window itself, is almost like there's nothing there. I'm just looking through this. I don't know. You just see glass. You see the dot. And you see your target, and you fire a shot. It's just very, very, very clean sight picture. Excellent optics. I shot thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds through my pistols with those Romeo 3 Max optics on them. High-end optic for sure. But most of my carry guns, like what I'm carrying right now, has a Holosun on it. I think Holosun is a great, take the Chinese part of the equation out of it, because I know some people will be like, Chinese, China optic and all that. That's fine. You're entitled to your opinions and how you feel about that sort of thing. But, I think that Holosun optics are a great balance of quality and budget, as far as price. I think they're very affordably and reasonably priced. They also seem to work quite well. I've got a bunch of Holosun optics now, and they work really, really, really well. And so that is, I think, a great example of something that's a little bit more budget friendly, are things like a Holosun optic versus, say, a Trichicon or an aim point, let's say. And so that'd be another example there. People probably would assume gear snob like Riley would use a Trichicon, and only a Trichicon. And they're great optics, don't get me wrong. But I don't see any need to, because there's a really good quality option out there that's a much more affordably priced.
Is Vortex making pistol optics?
Absolutely, they have for years. Their older stuff, like the Venom optic and the Viper optic, not particularly known for strength and durability. More recently, they've come out with their Defender line of optics, which are built a lot more robustly, seem to be doing pretty well, and they're reasonably priced. They're a bit spendier in the case of like the largest, like they have a new competition Defender optic, which is kind of an irony. It's the same line of optic. It's just got a bigger window in it. It's very obviously geared more towards competition use. That one's a bit, I think, on the spendy side for what it is, but they're reasonably priced, and they seem to be pretty solid. Speaking of Vortex, we were to talk about rifle optics. Let's say you've got things like the Vortex. I just had a momentary lapse there. Like they're really, really high-end magnified variable optic. Not the Viper, but Razor. Their Razor line of rifle optics. Okay, you got, like, for instance, take their 1 to 10 power variable optic. Those things are like $2,000. Not a cheap optic, right? Hey, Mark. Get some. He has some input on the matter too. um, but I've had really good success with their Viper line of rifle optics. I've got a 1-to-6 power Viper PST2. Been I've used that for years. It's got great glass. Is it razor quality? No, it's not quite that level, but it's fantastic. And I've made shots out to 800 yards with a 223. Quite capable.
I was going to say like a 1-to-6. That's a decent DMR scope. Yeah.
Well, certainly is in my case. I mean, it does everything I need to do at the distances I needed to do. So,
Yeah.
So yeah, the point is like there are high-end options for sure in the case, and we're just talking about one example here. High-end options in the case of rifle optics. There's mid-range. There's even low-end. So, for instance, I've had personal good success with things like there's the Holosun rifle, like red dot optics, but even like the 6 Sauer Romeo 5. I've got like 2 or 3 of those on a couple of inconsequential rifles. They've been great, and I would have no problem running them in. I've even actually used one of them I did one of them in a Kyle Lamb class a few years ago, in a carbine class. It held up great. I mean, we were in and out of vehicles. We were on the deck. We were up. We were moving. I mean, that optic even got dropped once and landed right on it and held zero. It didn't break or anything like that. It's like a $120 rifle red dot. So, I mean, there are obviously exceptions to the rule that money is not, like meaning big money is not necessarily required for big quality. There are definitely examples where, a little bit of money gets you still really good quality, or at least acceptable quality.
Well, still, I mean, for like a Holosun, your favorite Holosun, what's that kicking around at cost wise? Was it 300?
Yeah, it's sub 300 for sure. So like the 507C or 407C optics, which is like your kind of basic entry level full size pistol optic from Holosun, those are like 200 and I think you can find them on Amazon for like $220, something like that. $240, something like that. We sell them on our website too. I can't remember what the price is on our website. It's sub $300 for sure. You got the 507K, the 407K, the miniature size optics for like your slimline guns, your Glock 48s, your P365s. I mean, it's sub $200. I get like $180. And I mean, I've got several of those, and they're great. They've held up great. They work great. I'm using right now the 507 comp on my competition guns, and I'm starting to rack up thousands of rounds on that optic now. It's a great optic. It's a little north of $300, but compared to the fact that I used to run a Romeo 3 Max that was more like a $600 optic, yeah, it's pretty cool to have quality glass that holds zero, that works really well for a little more than $300 in the competition game. Yeah, absolutely.
Hard to beat it.
So, yeah. So, point is we want to look at what our use case is, what we need it to do. Is it going to do it reliably? And then we can make the budgetary choice of, is that, can we do that for less money? Well, that's a hard thing to deny when you get the job done with a particular product at a price you can afford. Like why spend more if that's the case?
Yeah. The
final thing we should touch on is one thing that becomes prevalent, especially I see it in social media, people that kind of look down upon those that don't spend a lot of money on their gear, those of a lower socioeconomic class or whatever.
Their gear's not Gucci.
Right.
They don't have that Prada chest carrier. They don't have that good old Gucci holster. Huh?
Right. I mean, I'll give you some examples. There are Facebook groups, for instance, that are, the whole point of the group is it's for gear snobs. Like the whole point of the group is to go in there and show off. You take pictures of, hey, look what I got, and it's really silly and pointless and dumb. But that's my point, is like there are people out there that pride themselves on the things that they can afford and the things that they can buy, or the things they can rack up on their credit card statement. And that's it. Like there's nothing more substantial beyond that. And then but at the same time, they'll kind of, pity you. Look at me. I've got, my high-end gear, and you peasants down there, you just stay away. I don't want to get my my gear contaminated by your filth.
I've got good gear. I've acquired stuff over the years, and I am so proud of how dirty and dingy and ragged it is. Because I use it.
Yeah.
I'm out there throwing it in the dirt and jumping down and doing stuff with it. And whenever I see those guys out there and they've got this totally clean plate carrier, their uniform is spotless, all their patches are in the right places, I'm like, that guy doesn't know what's going on.
Right. Yeah. So I think the point is here, we don't need to belabor the point, is that why should we look down upon those that don't choose maybe the quality gear that we choose? Certainly, I think it's important. I think it's probably even ethically maybe not an obligation, but I think of it certainly that way. A lot of times, like if I see somebody running gear that is not safe, certainly, or might be problematic later on from a quality standpoint, I'm going to try to find an opportunity to speak up in some way to try to help them. I feel like that's sort of my obligation, but this should be done carefully and without making them feel bad about their choice. And that's what I think really the key. At the same time, if I see somebody with low quality gear, supposedly, but they're running it hard and they're absolutely crushing it, like, bravo, kudos to them. Like, I'm going to salute them. That's way more impressive to me is the person that shows up with basic gear, basic equipment, and runs it realistically and runs it well compared to this gear snob over here that has the high-end Gucci stuff but never hardly shoots it, right? So if anything, I look down upon gear snobs that never use their gear.
Right. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, you got that expensive gun and I've got this,
right,
and I'm shooting better than you. Like, oh, that's an obvious training issue. So like, yeah, it's definitely far more important for you to go out and actually know how to run your stuff. And I think it's an important thing that we don't shame people for the gear that they're running, but it might also be a thing where they just don't know.
Yep.
Like I want to be honest but kind.
Yeah.
I want to be able, because I'm glad when people told me, hey, you probably will regret using that piece of gear in the future. And I'm the type of person, I got to understand why for myself. So I'll probably still run that, but I'll have that in the back of my mind that guy said that. I remember that was something that was said to me by a vet when I was new in the military. They're like, yeah, eventually you're not going to want to run your pistol down on your leg like that all the time. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? That's the coolest place to run it. That's where gunslingers are running their pistol. So obviously that's where I want to run it.
Right.
But after a couple of months of doing that, it was like, you know what? I'd much rather move my pistol up onto my plate carrier and get it up off of my legs. It's just experience that finally gets you there. You won't understand those things until you do it.
Right. I was just reminded of kind of how I came up in all of this. When I first started competing in 3-gun in 2016, I was using an AR that I acquired when I was still in law enforcement. And at the time that I acquired that AR, we had an approved list of, I can't remember how many, like 3 or 4, I think it was 4 brands. On that list were, as you would expect, Colt was one, Smith & Wesson was another, and then there's Bushmaster and DPMS, which DPMS and even Bushmaster, at one time Bushmaster was pretty good, but in more recent history, not so much. But DPMS has never really had a particularly great reputation.
Yeah.
But when I was, I needed a agency approved branded carbine to go through my post patrol rifle instructor course. And so I was kind of like, I got to go get something, and because I had an AR, but it wasn't any of those 4 approved brands. And so I start shopping, and this was like 2011, 2012, and ARs at that time were a little bit tougher to come by. There was a little bit more of a shortage. The price is a little bit higher, and I couldn't get my hands on a Colt fast enough. I couldn't get my hands on a Smith & Wesson fast enough. I didn't find any Bushmasters. I found a DPMS at a law enforcement supply store. And I was like, well, it's on the list. We'll see if it works. I bought it. And that thing actually ran great for me. And then over the years, I started upgrading, especially once it was no longer an agency rifle and for law enforcement use, but became the rifle I started using in 3-gun. I gradually replaced the trigger in it, bolt carrier group, stock, a number of things over the years to improve it, to make it a little bit better, to make it more reliable. It was never really not reliable for me, but I knew that, hey, that this may not last as many rounds as, say, a higher quality rifle would. I still have the rifle to today, and it's a great rifle, even though it's started out as a pretty inexpensive, cheap, not particularly high reputation rifle. So I lucked out with that one for sure. But my point is like that's where I started, and then I kind of, as you mentioned earlier, upgraded some things as time went on, as it suited me, as it fit my budget, and turned it into something quite a bit better than what it started out as. In the beginning, I also competed originally with a Springfield Armory XDM 9 pistol. Depending on who you talk to, maybe not people's favorite quality gun or anything like that. It never really let me down. I had a few malfunctions with it, but I don't, nothing like too major or whatever. I kept that thing totally stock, and I kept that rifle, and at least initially, totally stock for a long time too. And I took great pride upon myself that I could show up at matches and outshoot a lot of guys that had really high-end Gucci gear. And that kind of led me to be a little bit hesitant to actually upgrade things for a good while, because I took pride in that fact. I was like, I have completely stock gear, not very expensive. I'm not spending a lot of money here, but yet I'm showing up at matches and beating all of you. You know what I mean? And then what was interesting is when I finally did get around to upgrading some things like triggers and whatnot, I was like, oh man, I kind of wish I did this a while ago, because but at the same time, I put in all this work with stock gear, stock triggers, like stock mil spec trigger on my AR I was shooting 3-gun with for a long time.
So now you understand the difference.
Yeah.
And the upgrade is much more
I had
noticeable.
a huge appreciation for that when I finally did that. And I was kind of glad I went about it that way. Although I do think I held off longer than I probably needed to make some of those upgrades. But I was glad I put in the work when I did and got really good with less than ideal stuff.
Yeah. It's not the brush, it's the artist.
Absolutely. Well, we hope this episode has been helpful for you all in your own considerations of gear choices, and understand that it's not just about the price that you pay, but it's about the actual quality and the usefulness of the gear that you purchase. And we do want to encourage you to make sure that you're making good, wise decisions. Because again, especially if it's in the context of personal defense, concealed carry, I don't want to have any questions, any doubts in my mind that the gun I'm carrying today that might have to get used today in defense isn't going to let me down. I don't want to have to worry about that. That is not a monkey I want on my back. So make good, wise, prudent decisions. Spend your money wisely, all of that. If you have any further questions, always feel free to hit us up. podcast@concealedcarry.com is our email. You're always welcome to hit us up. We'll get back to you. Today's episode is sponsored by the Guardian Conference, guardianconference.com, and also Gunfighter Gun Oil, gunfightergunoil.com. Check them out. Appreciate your support of our sponsors and for your support of the podcast. Brian, final parting words?
It's not the gear, it's the training. Get a good mindset. The gear will come as you gain your experience. Be ready for whatever the mountain throws at you.
Absolutely. Well, guys, until next time, a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true.